I didn't gasp when I heard my parents whisper that I was being cut out completely. I just stood in the dim hallway, listening to the floorboards settle, tasting stale coffee on my tongue. They thought I was the weak link. They were about to find out exactly how wrong they were. The house smelled the way it always did on Sundays: roasted garlic, lemon furniture polish, and the faint, dusty scent of dried eucalyptus my mother kept in a hideous ceramic vase near the stairs. It was a suffocatingly normal smell. I was standing in the mudroom, my hand resting on the cold brass knob of the kitchen door. I had just driven 2 hours through a miserable, sleeting November rain to be there for my father's birthday dinner. My boots were wet. Water was seeping through my wool socks, pressing a damp, freezing ring around my toes. I was tired. I was irritable. I just wanted to drop my bags, drink a glass of the cheap Merlot my parents bought in bulk, and get the evening over with. Then, I heard the voices. The kitchen door was open just a crack. Through the narrow slit, I could see the edge of the granite island and the polished oak of the dining table beyond it. My mother, Helen, was speaking. Her voice was pitched low, but it had that sharp, reedy quality it always took on when she was talking about money. "We've finalized the trust with the lawyers on Thursday," Helen said. I froze. Not out of some dramatic sense of dread, but because I knew they had been dragging their feet on estate planning for a decade. My father, Talon, owned a chain of lucrative regional hardware stores. He treated the business like a fourth family member. "It's all going to you, Abby," my father added. His voice was heavy, thick with the scotch he usually started drinking around 3 in the afternoon. "The primary accounts, the real estate portfolio, and the controlling shares of the stores." There was a pause. I shifted my weight, the wet wool squishing silently inside my boot. I waited for my sister's response. I waited for Adriana to say, "What about Rachel?" Or even, "Are you sure?" Instead, I heard the soft, unmistakable sound of a chair scraping back, and Adriana's quiet, carefully measured voice. "Are you positive she won't contest it? You know how she gets." "Let her try," Helen snapped. The sound of silverware clattering into a drawer punctuated her sentence. "Your sister, she's not getting a single thing. We aren't leaving the legacy of this family to a woman who liquidates bankrupt diners for a living and rents a duplex at 32. She's too erratic. She'd sell the company for scrap." "She's a wild card," Talon agreed, sighing. "You're the safe hands, Abby. You understand the value of what we've built. We'll leave Rachel a nominal sum so she can't sue. $5,000. The rest is yours." I stood there in the dark mudroom. My stomach growled. It was a loud, hollow, deeply inappropriate sound, and for a second, I thought they might hear it. It was funny, in a dark, pathetic way. My entire future, my inheritance, my standing in the family had just been erased with a few signatures, and my body's only reaction was to remind me I hadn't eaten since breakfast. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the hot prickle of tears behind my eyes or the sudden urge to burst through the door and scream. I just felt cold. I looked down at the mudroom floor. The linoleum was peeling in the corner, revealing the gray adhesive underneath. I reached out and dragged my fingernail across the rough, chipped paint of the doorframe. A flake of white paint came loose and fell onto my wet boot. 32 years. 32 years of biting my tongue, of showing up to these stifling dinners, of pretending I didn't notice that Adriana's mistakes were treated as learning experiences, while my choices were treated as character flaws. I ran a successful liquidation firm. I dismantled failed businesses, auctioned off their assets, and found value in the wreckage. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't involve boardrooms or golf courses. It involved grease, heavy lifting, and negotiating with desperate people. But it was real. I took a slow, shallow breath. The air in the mudroom felt heavy and thick. If I walked in there right now, I would lose. I would be exactly what they said I was. Erratic, emotional, a wild card. I would yell. My mother would purse her lips and look at my father, and Adriana would put on her practiced face of sympathetic concern. Instead, I backed away. I moved slowly, silently, placing my feet carefully on the center of the floorboards so they wouldn't creak. I slipped my hand off the brass knob. I turned around, pushed the heavy exterior door open, and stepped back out into the freezing sleet. I got into my car. The leather steering wheel was like ice against my bare hands. I sat there for 10 minutes, watching the rain blur the windshield, listening to the rhythmic, hollow ticking of the engine cooling down. I felt a strange, jarring sense of clarity. They thought they had outsmarted me. They thought because I didn't wear a suit or play their polite, passive-aggressive country club games, I was stupid. But my job was literally taking apart failing structures and finding the hidden assets. I started the engine, put the car in drive, and drove out of their pristine suburban neighborhood. I headed for a cheap diner, 2 towns over. I ordered a plate of greasy fries and a black coffee. The neon light above my booth hummed violently. I chewed a fry. It was oversalted and lukewarm. The salt stung a small cut on my lower lip. I didn't need to cry. I needed to do inventory. I returned to the house 2 hours later. By then, the rain had stopped, leaving the driveway slick and black under the street lamps. I walked through the front door this time, making sure to slam it just hard enough to announce my arrival. "Sorry I'm late," I called out, stripping off my damp coat. "Hit a pothole on I-95. Had to wait for a tow truck to patch the tire." My mother appeared in the hallway, wiping her hands on a linen towel. Her smile was tight, her eyes doing that quick, involuntary scan she always did to assess my appearance. I was wearing dark jeans and a plain black sweater. Not up to the Fisher family Sunday standard, but clean. "Well, you're here now," Helen said, turning back toward the dining room. "Wash your hands. The roast is getting dry." I walked into the dining room. The table was set with the good china, the plates with the delicate gold rims. Talon was sitting at the head of the table, already working on his second glass of scotch. Adriana sat to his right. She was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. When I walked in, her eyes darted to my face, searching for a fracture, a sign of distress. I smiled at her, a wide, relaxed, completely empty smile. "Hey, Abby," I said, pulling out the chair opposite her. "Love the shirt. Silk?" Yes. Thank you," she stammered slightly, reaching for her water glass. The ice clinked sharply against the crystal. She was nervous. Good. Dinner began. It was a masterclass in domestic theater. My mother served the roast beef, which was, true to her word, overcooked and gray. The heavy silver fork felt cool and substantial in my hand. I focused on the sensory inputs of the room to keep my mind anchored. The scrape of the serrated steak knife against the china, the cloying artificial vanilla scent of Adriana's perfume, clashing with the smell of the meat. The subtle, wet clicking sound my father made when he chewed. For the first 20 minutes, the conversation hovered safely around the weather and Adriana's recent promotion at the marketing firm. I ate quietly, chewing the dry meat, swallowing it down with mouthfuls of harsh red wine. "So, Rachel," my father said suddenly, wiping his mouth with a heavy cloth napkin, "how is the junk business?" "Liquidation, Dad," I corrected mildly, taking another sip of wine. "And it's good. Busy quarter. A lot of mid-sized retail going under." "Shame," Talon grunted. "People don't know how to run a business anymore. No discipline. No long-term vision. That's what separates Fisher and Sons from the rest. We built a foundation." I looked at him. Really looked at him. The graying hair, the ruddy cheeks from the alcohol, the absolute, arrogant certainty in his eyes. He actually believed his own mythology. He had conveniently forgotten the winter of 2021. 5 years ago, Fisher and Sons expanded too fast. Talon bought 3 massive warehouses in Ohio right before the supply chain choked. The company bled cash. The banks threatened to call in the loans. My father was facing a total collapse, Chapter 11. The loss of everything. He hadn't gone to Adriana. Adriana was in Europe, finding herself on his dime. He had come to me. He came to my cramped, dusty office above a defunct bowling alley. He had cried. Actual, pathetic tears. He asked if I knew any hard money lenders, anyone who would take a risk on a bridge loan without demanding his own house as collateral. I did better than that. I had just finished liquidating a massive hotel chain's assets and was sitting on a significant pile of capital. But I knew my father's ego. If I handed him a check, he would resent me forever. He couldn't stomach being saved by his erratic daughter. So, I set up a Shell LLC Apex Holdings. I used my lawyer to negotiate the buyout of his toxic debt. Apex Holdings became the primary lien holder on the 3 Ohio warehouses, and essentially, the silent financial anchor of Fisher and Sons. My father paid his monthly interest to Apex, breathing a sigh of relief that some faceless corporate entity in Delaware had taken the bait. He never knew Apex was me. Sitting across from him now, watching him carve another slice of dry roast beef, a cold, dark knot of amusement tightened in my chest. He had just signed away the company to Adriana, completely unaware that if Apex Holdings called in the balloon payment, which, according to the contract, I could do with 60 days' notice at the 5-year mark, Fisher and Sons would instantly fold. The 5-year mark was next Tuesday. "You're right, Dad," I said smoothly, cutting a small piece of potato. "Foundation is everything. If the foundation is rotten, the whole house comes down." Adriana looked up, frowning slightly. "That's a bit grim, isn't it, Rach?" "Just the reality of business, Abby," I replied, meeting her gaze. Her eyes shifted away first. She was weak. If the company fell into her lap tomorrow, she wouldn't know how to read the balance sheets, let alone negotiate with a hostile creditor. She was a figurehead. I was the structural support they didn't even know they were standing on. "Well, let's not talk about depressing things," Helen chimed in, aggressively passing a bowl of green beans. "We have a lot to be thankful for. We have our health. We have each other." I took a scoop of the beans. They were lukewarm and tasted of canned tin and too much butter. "Absolutely," I said. My voice was steady, betraying nothing of the absolute war I was declaring in my head. I looked at the three of them, the architects of my exclusion. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to do what I did best. I was going to wait for the structure to fail, and then I was going to liquidate it. Opening hook. They thought I was the weak link. Standing in the shadows, I listened to my own parents write me out of the family will, leaving everything to my sister. But they forgot one crucial detail. I already owned their biggest secret, and today, I was finally cashing it all in. My office didn't smell like lemon polish or roasted garlic. It smelled like industrial carpet cleaner, stale toner, and the faint, coppery tang of old machinery. I leased a tight, windowless space directly above a bowling alley on the edge of town. Every 10 seconds, a low, guttural rumble would vibrate up through the floorboards, followed by the sharp, wooden crack of pins scattering. It was a terrible place to concentrate. I loved it. It was Tuesday morning. The rain from Sunday had frozen over, turning the streets into a slick, gray slush. I was sitting at my desk, my fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug of coffee that had gone tepid an hour ago. Across from me sat Arthur, my attorney. Arthur was a pragmatist. He wore suits that were slightly shiny at the elbows and chewed peppermint gum to mask the smell of cheap cigars. He didn't care about family dynamics. He cared about contracts. Arthur reached into his scuffed leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of paper. He slid it across the scratched laminate of my desk. The paper made a dry, whispering sound. "Notice of default and demand for payment," Arthur said. His voice was a gravelly monotone. He tapped a thick, blunt fingernail against the bottom line. 60 days' notice, per the original agreement. The balloon payment on the principal, plus the accrued penalty interest. $4.2 million. You sign here as the managing member of Apex Holdings, and I courier it to Fisher and Sons Corporate Counsel by noon. I looked at the document. The black ink seemed entirely too stark, too permanent for what it represented. This was the kill shot. A heavy bowling ball hit the alley floor downstairs. Thud, rumble, crack. My stomach did a slow, nauseating roll. This was the contradiction I couldn't quite shake. I had spent 32 years building armor against my family. I had convinced myself I didn't care about their country club memberships, their perfectly curated holiday cards, or their thinly veiled disappointment in me. But looking at the signature line, my throat tightened. It felt like I was swallowing a golf ball. I didn't feel like a ruthless corporate raider. I felt like a tired, angry kid standing outside a locked door, about to set the house on fire just to prove I had matches. "You okay, Rachel?" Arthur asked. He stopped chewing his gum. "Fine," I lied. The word tasted metallic in my mouth. I picked up my pen. It was a cheap ballpoint, the plastic slightly chewed at the end. If I signed this, there was no going back. There would be no polite Thanksgiving dinners. There would be no uneasy truces. I was actively dismantling my father's empire. I closed my eyes for a second, and suddenly, I was back in the mudroom, The wet wool of my socks, the cold brass knob, the casual, devastating tone of my mother's voice. She's not getting a single thing. I opened my eyes. The nausea vanished, replaced by a cold, settling calm. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name. Send it, I said, sliding the stack back to Arthur. Done. Arthur slipped the papers back into his briefcase. He stood up, buttoning his jacket. It'll hit his lawyer's desk by 1 o'clock. I'd expect the fallout to reach you by Thursday. He was off by 24 hours. The call came on Wednesday morning at 10:15. I was at a liquidation site, a failed chain of frozen yogurt shops cataloging industrial soft-serve machines. The air inside the abandoned shop was freezing and smelled like artificial strawberries and bleach. My phone buzzed in the pocket of my heavy canvas jacket. The caller ID flashed. Helen Mobile. My mother never called me during work hours. She considered my job a blue-collar hobby and refused to acknowledge its schedule. I hit accept. Hello? Rachel. You need to come to the flagship store. Now. Helen's voice wasn't just sharp, it was brittle. It sounded like glass fracturing under pressure. I'm working, Mom. What's going on? I clamped my clipboard under my arm, stepping over a coiled refrigeration hose. It's your father, she said. I heard a ragged, wet sound in the background, someone taking a heavy, panicked breath. There's a financial emergency. The lawyers are here. Adriana is here. He's asking for you. Please, Rachel, just get here. She hung up. I stood in the dark, sticky yogurt shop for a long minute. The silence was absolute. My heart was thudding against my ribs, a heavy, primitive rhythm. He was asking for me, not Adriana. Me. Because when the ship was actually sinking, they didn't want the daughter who could host a dinner party. They wanted the daughter who knew how to swim in the wreckage. I walked out into the freezing parking lot, got into my truck, and drove toward the Fisher & Sons flagship store. The flagship store was a massive, sprawling warehouse of a building. It always smelled the same, a dense industrial perfume of cut pine lumber, fertilizer, and the sharp chemical tang of PVC piping. Usually, that smell reminded me of childhood weekends, trailing behind my father as he barked orders at store managers. Today, it just smelled like inventory. I walked past the registers and climbed the steel staircase to the executive offices on the mezzanine level. The heavy mahogany door to my father's office was slightly ajar. I pushed it open. The air inside was stifling. The thermostat was cranked up, but my father, Talon, was shivering. He sat behind his massive oak desk, wearing a light blue Oxford shirt that was heavily stained with dark, crescent-shaped sweat marks under the arms. His skin looked gray, the ruddy color completely drained from his cheeks. A half-empty glass of scotch sat precariously near a stack of legal documents. It wasn't even noon. Helen was standing by the window, her arms crossed tight against her chest, her knuckles white. Adriana was slumped in a leather guest chair. Her mascara had smudged, leaving faint, bruised-looking shadows under her eyes. The cream silk blouse was gone, replaced by a cashmere sweater she kept tugging at nervously. I'm here, I said, closing the door behind me. The heavy click of the latch sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Talon looked up. His eyes were bloodshot and completely unfocused. Rachel, thank God. What's happening? I asked. I kept my voice neutral. I didn't sit down. I just stood near the edge of the large Persian rug, feeling the thick wool through the soles of my boots. We're being called in, Talon said. His voice was a raspy whisper. He reached out with a trembling hand and tapped the thick stack of paper on his desk. I recognized Arthur's heavy bond paper instantly. Apex Holdings, the bridge loan from Ohio. They're demanding the balloon payment, $4 million. We have 30 days. Can't you refinance? I asked, playing the part. With what? He barked, a sudden, desperate flare of anger rising in his chest. Interest rates are double what they were. The commercial real estate market is tanking. Our current margins won't cover a new loan structure. If we don't pay this, they seize the Ohio warehouses. If Ohio falls, the secondary creditors will panic. It's a cascade default. We'll lose everything. The stores, the inventory, the house. Wait, Adriana interrupted. Her voice was shrill, completely devoid of the measured, practiced tone she used on Sunday. She sat up straight, clutching her leather purse. What do you mean, the house? Dad, what about the trust? You said the trust was finalized on Thursday. The holding accounts, the portfolio. I looked at Adriana. The sheer, naked greed on her face was almost breathtaking. Her father was having a physical breakdown in front of her, facing the total collapse of his life's work, and her only thought was her inheritance. Talon didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on me. Rachel, you know these people. You work in liquidation. You deal with hard money lenders and corporate vultures all the time. Our lawyer says Apex is a shell company, registered in Delaware. We can't even find a name of a primary stakeholder. I need you to find out who they are. I need you to negotiate an extension. Tell them we'll give them equity. Tell them anything. He looked pathetic. The arrogant man who sat at the head of the dining table 3 days ago, dictating who was worthy of his legacy, was gone. You want me to negotiate with Apex? I asked slowly. Yes, Helen pleaded, taking a step toward me. The heavy diamond rings on her fingers caught the light. Please, Rachel, we know you and your father have had your differences, but this is family. This is everything we've built. We aren't leaving the legacy of this family to a woman who liquidates bankrupt diners. I looked from my mother's panicked face to my father's desperate, sweating brow. Then I looked at Adriana, who was frantically scrolling on her phone, probably texting her own lawyer. I reached into the inner pocket of my canvas jacket. I felt the stiff, crisp edge of the manila envelope I had brought with me. I pulled it out. I don't need to find out who runs Apex, I said. My voice was very quiet. The air in the room felt suddenly entirely devoid of oxygen. I walked over to the oak desk. I tossed the envelope onto the polished wood. It slid a few inches and bumped against my father's scotch glass. Open it, I said. Talon stared at the envelope. His hand shook violently as he reached out and peeled back the metal clasp. He pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was the original incorporation document for Apex Holdings LLC. Down at the bottom, listed as the sole managing member and primary financial beneficiary, was a signature. My signature. I watched his eyes track across the page. I watched the exact moment his brain processed the letters. Rachel Ann Fisher. He stopped breathing. The only sound in the room was the faint, muffled hum of a forklift backing up somewhere down on the warehouse floor. Beep, beep, beep. What is it? Helen asked, her voice high and tight. Tom, what does it say? Talon slowly looked up from the paper. The look in his eyes wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. It was sheer, unadulterated horror. You, he whispered. You're Apex. I'm Apex, I confirmed. I didn't smile. I didn't feel a rush of triumphant adrenaline. I just felt deeply, profoundly tired. What does that mean? Adriana demanded, standing up. Dad, what does that mean? It means, I said, turning to look at my sister, that I own the debt. 5 years ago, when Dad was about to lose everything, he came to me. He was too proud to ask for a handout, so I bought his toxic debt through a shell company to keep the lights on. I've been floating this company for half a decade. You trapped me, Talon choked out. A dark red flush was creeping up his neck. You plotted this. You waited 5 years to destroy your own family. I didn't trap you, Dad, I said, my voice hardening. I saved you. I gave you 5 years to fix your margins. I gave you a below-market interest rate. You were the one who bought 2 more failing locations in Michigan instead of paying down the principal. You trapped yourself. You can't do this, Helen gasped. She stumbled back against the windowsill, putting a hand over her mouth. Rachel, you're our daughter. Am I? I asked. The bitterness finally bled into my tone, raw and ugly. Because on Sunday I stood in the mudroom. I listened to you both finalize the trust. I listened to you hand everything to Adriana. I listened to you call me a wild card, an erratic failure who deserved $5,000 and a swift exit. Adriana froze, the color completely drained from her face. She remembered what she had said. Are you positive she won't contest it? You heard that, Talon said numbly. I heard every word, I said. I stepped back from the desk. You wanted Adriana to be the safe hands for the legacy. Well, congratulations, Abby. The legacy is all yours. Along with $4.2 million in immediately callable debt, I suggest you start looking for a buyer. You can't take the company, Adriana shrieked, her veneer completely shattering. She looked at our father. Dad, do something. She can't just take my inheritance. There is no inheritance, Adriana, I said quietly. The equity is gone. The house is collateral. The trust is funding an empty shell. I looked at my parents one last time. They looked small, fragile, and utterly broken. A part of me, the child who just wanted to be praised for getting good grades, the daughter who wanted to be looked at the way they looked at Adriana, ached. It was a deep, bruising ache in the center of my chest. I had won, but I hadn't won their love. I had just forced their respect through financial violence. I turned around and walked toward the door. "Rachel," my father called out. His voice was small, begging. "Please." I didn't stop. I opened the door, stepped out onto the mezzanine, and let the heavy mahogany slam shut behind me. The sharp, overwhelming smell of cut pine and fertilizer filled my lungs. I walked down the steel stairs, my boots ringing loudly against the metal, and headed out into the freezing slush of the parking lot. It was cold, but for the first time in 32 years, I could finally breathe. Thank you for watching this story. If you felt every twist and raw moment of Rachel's journey, hit that like button and share it with someone who appreciates a little well-deserved karma. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our deep, character-driven audio dramas. Drop a comment below. Would you have done the same thing if you were in Rachel's shoes? Let's discuss. See you in the next video.